Hi guys, and welcome back to Pass and Move. And for today's game, we are actually it's not a game, rather we are back for a we're going to continue our Premier League guides. So the team that we're doing here today is actually going to be Burnley. It's a tactics and team guide, so we're going to try and go through some of the more important tabs here, mainly squad tactics, and maybe you can try and cover some other things if the video is not too long by then already. But yeah, we're just going to go through about who to sell, who you should keep, areas that you might need to invest in, tactics that suits the squad as a whole, and hopefully we can get the best out of this team and really gun for more. So the expectations from the board is just to avoid relegation, but I think with the squad that you've got, you can probably do a little bit better and maybe get mid-table and hope to improve next season. But obviously it's all about continuing upwards improvement. In terms of the FA Cup, it's reached the 5th round, even though you enter the 3rd round, so that means just winning twice. You should be able to do that. The League Cup or the Carabao Cup, you enter in the 2nd round and you're expected to reach the 4th round. Very doable. I would say take the League Cup a little bit more seriously than the FA Cup. I think the FA Cup... Right, okay, you know what, you could take either one of them more seriously, but you probably have a better chance of winning the League Cup. And the reason why I say is that obviously cup competitions give you Europa League football, so being in Europe would be a huge boost. Even if you somehow end up getting relegated, it would be a huge financial success basically, and I think you go straight into the group stages, but you probably have a better chance of winning the League Cup, so you might want to take this a little bit more seriously. But yeah, I mean, do not take the cup competitions lightly in favour of the Premier League. And in terms of where they expect you, or the season preview of where you're going to end, it is the relegation zone. So you are one of the 3 teams, but I think you can definitely do well enough. The squad doesn't have a lot of depth in truth, and you can rely on a first team 11 who should get the job done for you. It's just you have to hope more than anything that no one gets injured. But yeah, in terms of how I like to do things, I like to have a squad of 22 players. You have 26 here, so you have 4 more than necessary. And the way I like to have the balance of my team, I feel like people are always asking that, is that you should have a first 11 of leading or star players or world-class players for the division. And whatever division you're in, really, we're in the Premier League, so you're going to have to try and do that. And a backup 11 of youngsters who can fulfill their potential to becoming leading players or star players or world-class players. So that's just the kind of balance that I like to go for, so we have to try and keep that in mind for today. I feel like a lot of these, well, not a lot of these, but like I said, about half of them are not ready for the Premier League in the first place. So you kind of have to start off small, try and sign decent players, good players, and just keep building it until you can actually afford to start bringing in leading players. And the better you perform, the more money you make, the more... obviously, just staying in the Premier League itself, you get a huge financial rewards. So in terms of the finances itself, you're on 23 million, but like I always say, just staying in the Premier League is good enough. You get a reward for being in the division itself anyways, depending on what position you end in, but also your transfer budget will increase heavily. So with this type of money, you should be able to bring in good players for your team. Debt is kind of bad. I mean, it's 12 million in total. There's only 3.45 remaining apparently. You can kind of finish it off by next year. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it really is just a matter of staying in the league. Apparently you are financially rich, so that's good to see as well. A club without debt, and you can really take them into some really just make history of them. So speaking of that, let's have a quick look at their history. They've been sort of in and out of the Premier League, but you're going to try and keep them there for a while now. You can make it 2 seasons in a row. I think every season they've come into the Premier League, they've left the next, so you kind of need to try and stay. But in terms of cup competitions, you've won the Premier League twice. I actually didn't know that, so you do have some history in it, but you can definitely add to it. You can be the first manager to win the Premier League for Burnley in about 50 to almost 60 years time. So that's a huge incentive. You won the Championship a couple times, so it looks like you have some decent history. Even the FA Cup was won once in 1914, but nothing recent. So you will want to add in that sense. So definitely interesting to take Burnley on. But for now, main aim, just avoid relegation. And with this squad, you should be able to do that. So we'll have a deeper look at the squad players. You already got 4 goalkeepers. And in truth, you only need 2. But let's have a quick look at in terms of what we can do to get the best out of the squad. I think you can generally tell, but the thing that we're going for is a 4-2-3-1. So these are the squad's best 11 players, and trying to fit them into the same side. We've got a defensive midfielder, goalkeeper, attacking midfielder right, the centre back, midfielder again, a left winger, striker, defensive midfielder, centre back, centre back again. So that 11 there, the best sort of formation for them is actually the 4-3-3, not the 4-2-3-1. I made a mistake. We're playing with a 4-3-3 tactic, and we'll discuss it more. But bearing that in mind, that's where we can start to look at where we have numbers and where we're missing numbers, or what areas to invest in terms of the squad. So in terms of your first choice goalkeeper, is miles ahead, Tom Heaton, good player for the division. He's an England international as well, and who knows, if he continues his good form, maybe he'll represent England a little bit more. He's only got 3 caps to his name, I think. But yeah, a good player for the division. He's going to be a first choice goalkeeper, and you definitely can't rely on anyone else. Decent player for your team, and I think he's sort of one of those players in your squad who are better than where the club are in terms of their stature, I suppose. You're bottom of the table, so you can kind of expect to have decent players, but you actually have a good one here, so you have to try and get the best out of him. The other 3 goalkeepers are Nick Pope, Anders Lindegaard, the former Manchester United goalkeeper, Adam Legzdins as well. But as you can tell, they are not good enough at all, just looking at the star rating. So Nick Pope, only good enough for Sky Bet Championship. The same can be said for Lindegaard. Actually, he's a Sky Bet League 1. And Adam as well is a decent player for Sky Bet League 2 side. So those 3 goalkeepers definitely not good enough. I think if you sell all of them, you might be able to reinvest that money into bringing in a young goalkeeper who has potential to overtake Tom Heaton's post, basically. I mean, he is 31 years of age, so you can't expect him. He's a goalkeeper, so he should last a bit longer, but he will start to decline soon enough, and hopefully bringing in a youngster by selling all 3 of these would be a good option. In terms of your right backs, Matt Lowton is going to be your first choice, and he's a decent player for the division, and his backup is actually I think not good enough. So that's another area that you might want to invest in. So he's only a Sky Bet Championship leading player, so if you sell him off and bring in a youngster again who can overtake what's his name, Matt Lowton, then you should be okay. But I think there's another thing that you might want to consider. Your other option is selling off Phil Bardsley and bringing in someone, a right back who has good potential, a good ability rather for the division, and that way he can become the first teamer and you can have Lowton as a backup. But again, you risk upsetting Lowton, of course, and at the same time it depends on finances, and fullbacks are kind of in short supply, to be honest, in the modern game. I just want to say, like I always say in all my episodes, you have to be careful to not sell a player off without being fully confident of being able to bring in someone to replace him. I feel like a lot of people do that and they end up with short of numbers. So the smarter thing to do might be to bring in a player already and then sell off the player that you don't need anymore. That obviously depends on finances and a lot of circumstances. That's your right backs though. Your centre backs is a bit of a weak area. You have Ben Mee, who's a good player for the division, and you also have James Strakowski, who's a good player, but he still has a bit of potential. So possibly you might have a leading player for the division on your hands there. So the first team, like I mentioned already, is quite suited to your to the division, and they can definitely do a good job, and they might even take you to mid-table if you can bring the best out of them. It's just the squad depth that's a bit of a concern. So I'm surprised that Burnley are even relegation candidates. There's other squads that we've been through, like Brighton, who are definitely not ready for the first division. So Burnley are definitely better off than those teams. Burnley actually a bit like Bournemouth. Their first team was a strong 11, but the backup was areas of concern. So Harry Flowers, one of the 4 centre backs, he's definitely not even good enough for Sky Bet League 2. And also Kevin Long, I think, is the player we missed out on. He's just a championship player as well. So if you do sell them both off, you might be good enough. But I think maybe Harry Flowers... Okay, no, he's not even going to be ready for division ever. So maybe you are better off selling him. And Kevin Long, worth 3.2 million. I don't think you'll be able to buy 2 centre-backs with just 3.2 million. So again, like I always say, invest first and then sell off the players and you should make that money back. Left backs, Stephen Ward, definitely good enough for the division. Good player for most Premier League sides. I think he's hardly got any... Well, he's not apparently got any cons at all. He's just over around a good left back. Irish. He's 31 years of age though, so that might be a bit of an area of concern. I've gone all the way back for some reason. but his backup, Charlie Taylor, should be able to take over him soon enough. Potential to be a good Premier League player, but the concern is that he's not already ready for the division, so you kind of have a decision to make. Do you trust that he'll improve quickly and keep him on and give him some game time whenever you can, when Stephen Ward isn't available, for example? Or do you loan him out for just the season, so when he's back he's ready for Premier League action, and you can bring in a loanee just while he's gone, Charlie Taylor's gone, and bring in a loanee who's ready for the Premier League division. And that leaves us with our defensive midfielders and centre midfielders. So we've got Jack Cork, Stephen Defoe, Dean Marney, Jeff Hendrick, Ashley Westwood and Frederick Ulvestad. Now, as you can see, Jack Cork and Stephen Defoe are actually part of our first team. And the reason being is that you kind of want to play Jack Cork, Stephen Defoe and Jeff Hendrick in the first 11. They're all ready for the first division, and all the other players that we'll go through aren't necessarily ready for that. I think they're all championship players, so that's why we're going to try and get by playing all three of them, we're trying to get the best out of them all and include the strongest XI ever. So it's like I mentioned, it just keeps proving me right, to be honest. Jack Cork, good player for the division. You don't have any depth, but your first 11 are good enough for the team. Stephen Defoe has a bit of a concern that he's susceptible to injuries, but good enough for the division. So again, another area that you might want to keep an eye out on. If Stephen Defoe this season, for example, keeps getting injured, you might want to look into selling him off. Jeff Hendrick, though, another good player for the division, and he'll play as a central midfielder for your team. That leaves us with the other backups, I suppose. Dean Marney, for example, just a championship player. Ashley Westwood, another championship player, and definitely Frederick is not good enough for the division. He's a Sky Bet League 1, so once more, squad depth a huge issue. Now, if you do end up selling off Dean, Ashley and Frederick, you do have to bear in mind that you don't have a defensive midfielder. Now, you do have two, of course, but you're trying to play them together because they're all good players for the division. So your backup will have to be a defensive midfielder, and then bring in two centre mids as well. Youth, of course, these players are good enough for the division. It's unlikely that you'll be able to bring in anyone who's interested in a team who's already a leading player for the side. So in that sense, you have to bring in a youngster who's ready for the first Premier League action, but has potential to become a leading player. You don't want to keep doing that cycle where you're only bringing in youngsters who only become good players for the division, and that just keeps happening over and over. So you do have to keep, be careful about that. But if you do sell these three, I mean, Dean's 2.8 million, Ashley Westwood's about 4.3 million, and who's that leave us with? Frederick is 550k. So you could probably bring in two youngsters with that money. Maybe I'm being a bit hopeful, to be honest, but yeah, again, like I always said, invest first and then sell off after. Having said that, you have now your wingers. So you got Johan and Robbie Brady, and you also got these two here. Now, this is a bit of an area of concern. Your first teamers are good enough. Johan, decent player for the division, and Robbie Brady, I think, who's also a good player for the Premier League. So that's good to see. But in terms of the backup players here, you've got Jonathan Waters. He's a Rodemantor, so doesn't even suit the tactic, to be honest, but he's not even ready for the first division. And you also got Scott Arfield, who's also a championship player. But yeah, I mean, it depends on how you see them playing. I think both of them, if they are playing in the tactic that we're trying to get them in, only one of them can actually play as a left winger. Actually, neither of them suit the tactic, to be honest. I feel like you're going to have to sell them off. You don't really have much of a choice. So this is the most area of concern so far for your team, and the reason is that not only are they making up numbers, but they're doing it poorly, and they not ready for the division, and they just don't suit the tactic at all. So I feel like if you are going to try and look into investing somewhere, you're going to do your best bet is selling off these two and investing in backup players for Robbie Brady and Johan Berg Gudmundsson. I shouldn't even have attempted to say his name. 4 strikers though, and you only need 2. So Chris Wood and Sam Vokes are the ones who you're going to rely on. Chris Wood's the first team, a decent player. Sam Vokes, another decent player. And Ashley Barnes and Nahki Wells are only championship players, so you can probably sell them off and make some good money for your other players. You'd be what I say about investing first and then selling off, you don't necessarily need to do that in the striker department, because you've got excess numbers, so you could gladly sell these 2 and then still be okay with your squad. You can even sell those goalkeepers. You can sell just 2 of them, for example, and you'd still have the numbers for your squad that are necessary, and then you can look to invest that money elsewhere and whatnot. So it really depends on how you break up your squad. It definitely is not, you can't do, it's going to be very unlikely that you'll be able to sell everyone that we're telling you should sell in one season. It's more of a gradual progress, and who knows, if you do end up, for example, being relegated, then a lot of the players who are good enough for the Premier League are going to want to leave once you go back to the Championship. So you have to keep these things in mind. You don't want to have to spend a ton of money on a Premiership player, and then if you do end up being dropped, then they're going to ask to leave, and then suddenly you have a huge gaping hole in your team. But yeah, that's kind of it in terms of the squad. So that's just to give you an idea of who you should sell, who you should keep. But like I mentioned, your first team's good enough for the division, good enough to even maybe get you mid-table, because a lot of the first teamers are good players for the Premier League. Just a few of them, I think 3 or so, are just decent players. But yeah, if you rely on your first team and hope, try and avoid rotating as much as possible. I feel like only do so if the player's out of form or injured. I think even out of form, they have to be horribly out of form for you to give a Championship player a chance. But otherwise, you should be okay. So it's about using your squad, properly, I suppose. But yeah, 4-3-3 is the way to go, and we'll go through each sort of thing in detail. But the tactic that we're going for is a possession one. So you're one of the bottom teams. Playing a 4-3-3 is a bit, risky, I suppose, because these wingers are pushed quite high up. It is kind of an attacking formation despite the defensive midfielder. So it's all around kind of solid. You don't have any real weaknesses in the squad. I mean, there's some minor issues, like here, for example, where it says that you don't have an attacking midfielder. The inside forward doesn't really experience that too much because he comes inside. But generally, there's no real necessary weaknesses, no real red squares here. So you kind of had everywhere, covered. But yeah, we're trying to play a possession type of football. Believe it or not, possession football is actually more, sort of defensive. That's why we're going for it. We're kind of suited for it. We can't really go for countering or, sort of a direct style of play, because it doesn't work with the formation we've got. And the formation that we're working with is hopefully to bring in our best 11 players in the squad. Otherwise, I would have loved to have used a formation like a 4-1-4-1 or a 4-4-2, for example, and just counter directly, and you wouldn't have any issues. But unfortunately, Goodmanson loves to play as an inside forward high up, and Brady loves to play as a winger forward high up as well. So you just kind of have to work with the squad you've got. So I thought, we've got a 4-3-3. How can we also still be defensive and hope to catch players on opposition teams on the break? And so it kind of just made sense to play possession type of football, which is defensive. You can use counter or even defensive mentalities, and you still should be able to keep possession well. Now, it's not what like everyone normally thinks, which is, possession means tiki-taka, taking risks, gung-ho sort of football. Actually, in truth, keeping possession is very risk-free. That's the whole point. You're keeping the ball as much as possible and letting the team run around. So you're playing very safe sort of football. So don't expect crazy amount of passes or any sort of that business, risky passes as in. You're actually trying to keep the ball, so playing it in a counter mentality means you take less risk while passing, and that way you keep possession a bit more. So like I mentioned, I would say stay on counter as much as possible, but if you are playing one of the bigger teams, defensive might be the way to go, so that you are capable of defending a bit better, I suppose. You'll still counter on defensive, but just not as much as counter, of course. So shorter passing is the only team instruction we go for. I'm a type of manager that likes to have as little team instructions as possible. Shorter passing is an option, but you can also go leave it on mixed and go on retain possession. You could possibly do both in truth, but I'm just a fan of shorter passing more than I am of retain possession. I feel like retain possession just keeps it for the sake of keeping it, and you play even less risky football. So it depends on how you like to play, really, and which instruction you prefer. We're also unstructured in terms of team shape. I like the player roles to do their job rather than playing on fluid, for example, and letting the team instructions. That's kind of the thing. That's how I interpret it. I feel like when it's structured, you're letting the team, the player roles do their job, and when you have it on fluid, that's kind of like relying on team instructions. So do you want each player to have his own individual job, which means his own player role, or do you want the whole team to work together and that would mean playing on fluid. They defend together, they attack together, and you can also have a lot more of team instructions. So if you're asking me what type of team instructions you should have if you're going for that type of thing, then work ball into the box, shorter passing, retain possession, playing a lower tempo, all that sort of business is good for retaining possession. Playing out of defense is probably a good shout as well, and that's kind of it. You can maybe... No, that's really it sort of for possession, to be honest. But yeah, this is just really my advice. But to go through each one individually, Wood is most comfortable as a target man on support. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily help with possession football, but considering you're a smaller team, you do kind of have to rely on a star striker sort of thing. Target man kind of suits that in that sense, and hopefully your players won't just be lobbing the ball forward endlessly, because they've got plenty of areas of strength in the squad. Players in all types of positions, so they'll be able to find other players quite easily, and shorter passing should hopefully help, not just lobbing the ball forward to the target man. It's just trying to bring the best out of Wood here, to be honest. Goodmanson, best as an inside forward, so we're playing him on the right wing. Lowton is a wing back on attack to complement that. Brady is best as a winger on support in truth, according to his preferences, but he can definitely do the attack role just as well. He's got flair and off the ball, so it's perfect. Left-footed winger, so he suits us really well. Irish international as well, and we've got Ward on a fullback on support to complement that. Central defender, he's more of a defensive centre back. But considering we're trying to keep possession, I'm going to play him a little bit in his, less comfortable role as the central defender instead. Definitely not good enough as a fullback, to be honest. If you're playing a defensive fullback, that kind of makes sense. But as a wing back and a fullback, he doesn't necessarily have the attacking attributes to suit that role. Tarkowski is a ball-playing defender, which suits us perfectly. He could have a little bit better vision, but his, runs with the ball through centre, tries to play out of trouble, all that sort of business suits our possession style. Defour is the defensive midfielder that we're playing as a deep-line playmaker. I originally wanted to play him as a centre mid, but he seems to be most comfortable as a defensive midfielder. He'll be the one to hold the line sort of thing, help these centre backs, and the fullback should kind of be back. It's more like the wing back who's going to be, running forward. But yeah, deep line playmaker. So not only is he going to be holding the midfield for us, but he's very capable of passing and I guess playing a bit risky football. Even though the deep line playmaker, their instructions isn't to play risky passes. We can definitely expect sort of long balls forward to the target man when he sees fit, I suppose. But he's probably going to be more likely to find the advanced playmaker here. On attack duty is Hendrick. He's definitely more comfortable as a deep line playmaker, but we don't need two of those. Roaming playmaker maybe would be okay, but his decision making is a bit poor. He's kind of got the physicals for it. He'd be a decent roaming playmaker, but we're sort of looking for an attacking role, and an advanced playmaker on attack seems to work best there. You could probably go with a centre midfielder on attack as well, but I just feel like advanced playmaker makes the most sense because we're trying to play possession football. And we've got Cork in one of the new roles in the game, so it's a bit interesting. I haven't actually tested out that role, so I haven't seen it live in action sort of thing, but he's comfortable with it. It suits our tactic, and he's going to be playing as a carrier. We'll actually talk more about that role in just a second, but as you can see, perfect attributes for that role. Maybe strength needs a bit of help, but otherwise he'll be good enough there. And that's kind of the player roles that we're going for. In general, there's not too many people that aren't too comfortable, and the tactics themselves work quite well. If you're asking me what should you be working towards to try and keep possession, it's definitely to have a bit more of a less risky sort of passes, I guess, players who don't risk too much because you're trying to play possession. You need for example, you don't necessarily want a target man, you want to try and keep possession, so false 9 might be a bit better for that type of role, but he's not comfortable playing it, so eventually if you do replace him with the false 9 if you ask me. 4-3-3 is very good for possession football. You don't want wingers though, because you don't want too many crosses or players taking on their man too much or anything. You might be better off playing an inside forward instead, with Goodmanson on the other side as well. Wing backs, sort of defense is okay. If you play an inside forward there, you'll have to adjust to a wing back. In terms of midfield, I like the anchorman role when I'm playing a 3-man midfield, and the ball-winning midfielder makes sense as well to win the ball back for possession. Advanced playmaker does decently as well, but maybe you should be better off playing a central midfielder on attack so he doesn't have too much risk with the advanced playmaker. For example, there's a lot of risky passes and dribbling more and whatnot. But yeah, In terms of the carrilero, just to give you guys an idea, it's called the shuttler. Supporting role, more often than not utilized as part of a midfield 3, which suits us as perfect. Is the job of these shuttlers to cover lateral areas of the pitch and link the defensive midfield area with the attacking midfield area, and this is what separates the carrillo from a box-to-box midfielder, as they are not expected to shuttle between boxes but merely between lines of midfield. So that's perfect for us, really. You know, he'll kind of help going up and down, but not really so much as a box-to-box midfielder. It's kind of lateral movement. And that will help as, you know, Defoe sort of sits back, Hendricks sort of, you know, pushes forward, and Jack Cork's just there shuttling side by side. Especially as we have a bit of a gap in these little spots here, it would help to have Cork there. So that's kind of it in terms of the tactics. I think, you know, this episode has been a little bit long, but maybe we can quickly go through some things. You can definitely improve your staff. Your head of youth development is decent, but his personality is just balanced, which means it will rub off on other players, so you might want to look to let him run out his contract and then bring in someone better. Scouting system, of course, can be revamped. Training, I just really keep it on high and on balance during preseason, then change it to balanced and average during the season itself. Schedule, you could do better with better friendlies, really. We talked about competition. Scouting's been entirely revamped. Use the short-term scouting focus for during this transfer window. It's really helpful. You could adjust your scouting budgets, and more importantly, you should change your senior packages and your youth packages to both being world. Give as much investment as possible to your scouting, and hopefully they'll reward you for that. In terms of the transfer budget, it looks like you have a fair amount with 10 million. If you ask me, I like to keep it in the middle, just leaning slightly towards transfer budget, so it's more likely that you've got 6 million. If you keep it at 10 million, like I was saying earlier, you've only really got 30k wages to offer anyone that comes in, so that's not much money at all. We've been through finances, under 23s, players to look out for. No one necessarily ready for the first team, I've already had a look, but in terms of potential, there are some players that you would want to help into your first team. So I think pretty much just these two, Daniel Aguirre and Aidan O'Neill. Both players will seem to be capable of slotting into your first team eventually. They do have the roles suited for it, but yeah, it's just about sending them out on loan as much as possible, and hopefully they'll return ready for the first team. But yeah, I think that's all for today's episode. I've left a Patreon link in the description box. I'd love if anyone can support, that'd be perfect. I really appreciate it. But otherwise, if you did enjoy today's episode, then please of course hit the like button and subscribe for more Daily Football Manager 2017 content. And as always, guys, thank you all very much for watching.